The night was electric, charged with the kind of energy that promised something unforgettable. Varnell, Tia's pride and joy, moved with a swagger that was all his own, the embodiment of quiet power wrapped in tailored designer threads. He wasn't just her younger brother, he was her confidant, her enforcer, and the only man she trusted with her life. Next to him, Tia stood like a queen, exuding grace and authority, their connection so seamless it felt more like an unspoken pact than sibling affection. For anyone else, it would have been a regular Friday night, but seeing Tia and Varnell together in public, that was an omen, a warning. If these two were in the same room, something big was about to go down. Tonight wasn't about business, though, or so it seemed. It was rare for them to step out for anything other than strategy or a family gathering, but tonight was different. Tia had called Varnell personally, her voice carrying a note of urgency laced with intrigue. The streets of Raleigh buzzed with whispers. Tia and Varnell are out together. What's happening? Meanwhile, Zia, the crown jewel of their operation, was at home, her innocence a sharp contrast to the world she was growing up in. She was mouthy like her mama, quick with her tongue and sharper with her wit, but she still had the light of youth in her eyes. Everyone knew she was next in line, though she didn't fully understand the weight of that yet. Protected fiercely by her uncle and mother, Zia's world was curated, a blend of luxury and discipline designed to mold her into something greater. As Tia and Varnell arrived at the sleek, upscale lounge downtown, the air shifted. Heads turned, conversations paused, and an unspoken tension blanketed the room. Varnell scanned the crowd, his expression unreadable, while Tia sauntered in like she owned the place. Because, in many ways, she did. "Why are we here again?" Varnell asked, leaning in close. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of curiosity. Tia smirked, her diamond-studded earrings catching the dim light. "We're meeting someone, a new player." Varnell raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He trusted Tia implicitly, though he didn't like surprises. The two of them slid into a private booth in the back, the room's ambience buzzing around them like static. Moments later, the door opened, and a figure stepped in. The entire lounge seemed to hold its breath. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly cut black suit that spoke of both wealth and danger. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as if he could read the room in a single glance. "Who's that?" Varnell asked, his tone suddenly sharp. Tia's smirk deepened. "Meet Kane. He's about to change everything." Kane strode toward them with a kind of confidence that was either earned or deadly. As he approached their booth, he extended a hand, his voice smooth as silk. "Tia Varnell, I've heard a lot about you two." Varnell didn't take the hand immediately, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the man. "Good things, I hope." Kane chuckled. "Depends on who you ask." Tia leaned back, her gaze unwavering. "Well, Kane, I hope you're ready. Around here, you're either family or you're a problem. There's no in-between." The room seemed to buzz louder, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of a storm, and everyone in that lounge felt it. Kane's return wasn't just unexpected, it was seismic. He had vanished from the hustling scene before Varnell had even grown into the sharp young hustler he was now. Back then, Kane had been a legend, his name whispered in street corners and spoken with equal parts reverence and fear. Then he disappeared, swallowed whole by the feds, leaving a power vacuum that Tia had stepped into with unshakable authority. During those years, Tia had kept Kane's name alive in ways few would have dared. She'd taken long, grueling commutes to visit him in federal lockup, always carrying envelopes of cash from Varnell, who had no idea where the money was going. "It's business," Tia had told him when he'd asked, and Varnell, trusting her judgment, didn't push further. The money wasn't just a gesture, it was a message. Their crime family was strong, their loyalty unwavering, and Kane was still part of their story, even if he was locked away. When Kane walked into the lounge that night, fresh from his 10-year bid, he carried the weight of his absence like a crown. He wasn't just stepping back into the game, he was stepping back into a world that had changed drastically in his absence. And yet, He moved like nothing had changed, as if time had been waiting for him to catch up. "Good to see you free," Tia said, her voice smooth but loaded with meaning. She played along when Kane remarked that he'd heard good things about her and Varnell. She let the lie hang in the air, a subtle nod to the unspoken truth, that she had been his only link to the outside world all these years. Varnell, unaware of the deeper history between them, sized Kane up with quiet skepticism. He didn't trust easily, and Kane's sudden appearance felt like a disruption to the careful balance he and Tia had built. "So what's the plan, Tia?" he asked, his tone even but edged with curiosity. Tia leaned back in the booth, her sharp gaze darting between the two men. "The plan," she said, "is to remind everyone who we are. Kane's been out of the game, but he's not out of the family. He's back on his feet now, and we're about to make moves that'll have the whole city talking." Kane nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm here to work. I owe you that much, Tia." Varnell's jaw tightened, his instincts on high alert. He didn't like being left in the dark, especially not about something or someone this significant. "What exactly are we talking about here?" he pressed. Tia's smile was razor sharp. "We're talking about legacy, Varnell. Ours. And Kane here is going to help us solidify it." The tension between the three of them was palpable, but it was clear Tia had already made her decision. Kane was back, and whether Varnell liked it or not, he was part of their circle now. What wasn't clear, what Varnell couldn't shake, was the sense that Kane's return was as much a risk as it was an opportunity. As they clinked glasses to their newfound alliance, the unspoken truth loomed heavy over the table. Kane wasn't just back in the fold. He was a storm on the horizon, and they were all about to find out just how much the world had changed in 10 years. Kane had always been a natural force, a strong-built country boy with an unshakable presence. He was the kind of man who peddled marijuana casually in the backwoods of Rose Hill and doubled as an enforcer when local threats dared to disturb Tia's operations. Their bond was forged in chaos, a meeting that neither of them could have planned, but both would come to see as destiny. It was right after Zia's father had gone to jail on a breaking and entering conviction, leaving Tia to navigate the world on her own terms. She wasn't the type to wait for help, though she was fire and steel, and everyone in Rose Hill knew it. On that fateful day, she found herself crashing a dice game to serve a drop to Bossman Jenkins, a loudmouthed hustler who ran the local scene with equal parts charm and intimidation. The game was in full swing, Jenkins' taunts cutting through the humid air like a blade. Tia didn't care. She strode straight into the circle, a duffel bag full of pounds slung over her shoulder. The men turned to look, their dice forgotten for the moment. One of them, a wiry young thug with a smirk too big for his face, decided to test her. "No bitches allowed," he sneered, his voice cutting through the chatter. Tia didn't even blink. She stepped closer, her expression calm, but her words razor sharp. "If you see a bitch, slap a bitch. Your mama's a broke-ass bitch." The circle erupted into laughter, Jenkins clutching his belly as he doubled over. But the young thug wasn't laughing. His pride bruised and his hand twitching, he lunged at Tia, a knife glinting in his hand. Before Tia could even react, Kane stepped forward, his movements swift and precise. In one fluid motion, he wrapped the man in a chokehold, his arm tightening like a vice. The crowd froze, their laughter silenced as Kane leaned in, his voice low and lethal. "I wish you would," he whispered into the thug's ear. "I will kill you right here, right now." Tia, ever composed, had already drawn her gun. As the tension crackled in the air, she stood with her weapon pointed squarely at the thug, and at Kane, just in case he got any ideas. The crowd didn't dare move. Bossman Jenkins, finally regaining his composure, stepped forward and slapped the thug hard across the face. "Fool, you don't ever disrespect my business," he barked. Kane didn't need permission. With one final brutal squeeze, he cut off the man's oxygen. The thug's body went limp, collapsing to the pavement in a heap. Tia glanced down at the unconscious man, then back at Kane. For a moment, they locked eyes, and she saw something in him, controlled power, a quiet intensity that matched her own fire. "Who the hell are you?" she asked, lowering her gun slightly but keeping her guard up. "Kane," he said simply, releasing the thug and stepping back. "And you?" "Tia," she smirked, her voice steady. "You work for me now." From that moment on, Kane became a permanent fixture in Tia's orbit, a protector and enforcer whose loyalty was as unshakable as his strength. Their partnership was forged in blood and defiance, and it was clear to anyone who crossed their path together they were unstoppable. From that day forward, Kane became Tia's silent storm, operating in the shadows to handle the threats and hostile affairs that dared to disrupt her empire. He was her invisible line of defense, the kind of man who got things done without leaving a trace. His presence was so discreet, so calculated, that even Varnell, her right hand, never knew Kane existed. It was no accident. Tia had carefully drawn the line between Kane and her family. To her, Kane wasn't just muscle, he was a weapon, one she wielded with precision. She'd met him right before Sugar Boy, the man who had once stolen her heart. Sugar Boy was everything Kane wasn't: charming, polished, politically connected. He had a seat at every table and a face that drew trust from even the most skeptical. But deep down, Sugar Boy was also cut from the same cloth as Kane, a hustler, through and through. The contrast between the two men wasn't lost on Tia. Sugar Boy had been her great love, a man who fit neatly into her vision of something bigger, more legitimate. But Kane was raw power, a protector forged from the grit and grind of survival. He was the opposite of Sugar Boy in all the ways that mattered, yet somehow they were two sides of the same coin. For all his quiet strength, Kane was never a contender for Tia's heart. Intimacy between them was never spoken of, never acted on, not because the thought hadn't crossed her mind. Every now and then, in the quiet moments between chaos, it did. After all, what woman wouldn't admire a strong, silent, handsome protector who stood steadfast in her shadow? But Tia was pragmatic, and she knew better than to mix business with desire. Kane was invaluable as he was, and she couldn't risk losing him over something as unpredictable as feelings. Their connection was built on mutual respect and trust, a bond forged in blood and loyalty. Kane never crossed the line, and neither did she. Their dynamic was unspoken, but it was clear he served as her shield, and she gave him purpose. Still, in her rare moments of solitude, Tia couldn't help but wonder. What if? What if she'd met Kane in a different life, under different circumstances? What if she'd allowed herself to fall for the man who was always there, always watching, always ready to do whatever it took to keep her safe? But those were just passing thoughts, fleeting as the wind. Tia didn't have time for what-ifs. Her life was a constant chess game, and Kane was one of her most important pieces. She wasn't about to lose him, not to enemies, not to mistakes, and certainly not to her own wandering mind. Varnell had always trusted Tia to handle her affairs, especially when it came to men. She was calculated, shrewd, and never allowed emotions to cloud her judgment. Over the years, he'd seen a few come and go, discarded like yesterday's trash, when Tia decided they'd outlived their usefulness. For that reason, Varnell never felt the need to step in. Tia wasn't the type to fall for the wrong man, and she certainly didn't need anyone playing protector. But with Don, something felt different from the start. Varnell's instincts, honed from years of navigating the streets and managing their family business, told him Don could be a problem. He wasn't like the others. Don moved quietly, almost too quietly, and his reserved demeanor had an air of mystery that Varnell couldn't immediately place. It wasn't that Don came off as weak, quite the opposite. It was the way he seemed to observe everything without revealing much of himself, as if he were always one step ahead. At first, Varnell couldn't shake the idea that Don might be a threat waiting to happen. He'd watched the way Tia interacted with him, how she allowed him into spaces most men wouldn't dare to enter. That alone was enough to make Varnell keep his guard up. It wasn't until Varnell decided to take Don for a ride through the winding back roads of Rose Hill in his custom donk on 26s that his perspective began to shift. The car was a statement piece, loud and commanding, much like Varnell himself. He used it to test people, to see how they reacted to the flash and attention that came with it. To Varnell's surprise, Don didn't flinch. He climbed into the passenger seat with ease, casually complimenting the craftsmanship of the vehicle without overdoing it. As they cruised through the countryside, passing fields and small-town landmarks, Don asked thoughtful questions about Rose Hill, its history, and the way things worked out there. He didn't try too hard to impress or dominate the conversation. He just listened, showing genuine interest in what Varnell had to say. By the time they returned to town, Varnell's initial wariness had melted away. Don wasn't a threat. He was a solid man, someone who carried himself with quiet strength and respect. More than that, he seemed to understand the delicate balance of loyalty and power that held Tia's world together. He's not like the others, Varnell thought to himself as they parked back at Tia's spot. For the first time, he could see Don not as a rival or potential problem, but as an ally, and maybe even a friend. As the months rolled by, Varnell began to trust Don in ways he hadn't trusted any man around Tia before. Their bond grew quietly but steadily, built on mutual respect and an understanding of the unspoken rules of the game. Varnell started bringing Don deeper into his world, allowing him to tag along on trips to the stash houses and safe spots scattered across Rose Hill. These weren't casual hangouts. These were the nerve centers of Varnell's operation, where power and wealth were stacked in every corner. Don was an outsider, stepping into a world few ever saw, but he carried himself with a quiet composure that earned Varnell's respect. Once inside the stash houses, Don saw the scale of it all. Pounds upon pounds of marijuana stacked like bricks, each one representing money, control, and influence. Varnell moved through the rooms with a practiced ease, grabbing several pounds at a time and tucking them into his pants and belt line with the kind of precision that spoke of years of experience. "Grab a couple," Varnell would say, motioning to Don without looking back. It wasn't a question, it was an expectation. Don didn't hesitate. He followed Varnell's lead, loading up with a calm, deliberate motion that impressed the younger man. He didn't complain about the weight or the risk, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions. To Varnell, this was the ultimate test of trust, and Don passed with flying colors every time. The two became inseparable. Where Varnell went, Don was often not far behind. Their partnership blurred the lines between Tia's relationship with Don and Varnell's growing respect for him. It started to feel less like Don was Tia's boyfriend, and more like he was just another member of Varnell's inner circle, a brother in arms who understood the stakes and the sacrifices. In time, Don wasn't just tagging along. He was actively participating, offering insights and suggestions that showed he was more than just muscle or a tag-along. He had a sharp mind and a knack for strategy that Varnell couldn't help but admire. For Varnell, Don had gone from potential threat to trusted ally, someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him in the shadows of their world. And for Don, this immersion into Varnell's circle wasn't just about survival, it was about proving his worth, not just to Tia, but to the family she had built. The eerie, familiar vibes began creeping back into Don's psyche, pulling him deeper into Tia's intricate hustling den. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a magnetic pull toward the streets that had shaped him. This wasn't just about Tia anymore. It was about the rhythm of the hustle, the adrenaline of fast moves and faster money. Deciding to check in on his old stomping grounds, Don retraced his steps to the trap spots that had once been his world. It wasn't long before he pulled into Solo's yard, the hum of a brand new black Porsche announcing his arrival. Solo, a grizzled OG who had seen it all, stepped out of his makeshift garage with a knowing grin. "What you doing out here, D?" Solo called out, his voice raspy from years of smoking. Don stepped out, a sly smirk on his face as he popped the trunk. "Got something for you, big homie." Like magic, Don produced a tightly wrapped bale of high-end exotic marijuana, the kind that didn't just turn heads, but stopped conversations. Solo's eyes lit up, and he nodded in approval, already pulling out a hefty trash bag full of cash. The exchange was seamless, a well-rehearsed dance between two men who had been in the game long enough to know how to keep things efficient. No words were wasted, no unnecessary movements made. Solo handed over the bag with a slap on Don's shoulder. That premium," Solo said, inhaling deeply from the open bale. "You keep bringing this heat, and I'll keep bringing the bags." Don chuckled, slamming the trunk shut. "You know me, Solo. I move fast." Fast was an understatement. Once the deal was done, Don slid back into the Porsche, his fingers grazing the turbo switch as if it were second nature. With a flick of his wrist, he disappeared into the night, the engine roaring as he weaved through the endless back roads of the countryside. The Porsche became a blur, its sleek frame cutting through the dark like a phantom. County lines blurred together, the stars overhead spinning like a carousel as Don pushed the car to its limits. Each turn, each mile, brought him closer to Tia's place, the fast cash safely tucked away in the back seat. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the thrill, the feeling of control, and the unshakable bond he was building within Tia's world. By the time Don pulled up to Tia's spot, the adrenaline was still coursing through his veins. He stepped out, the trash bag slung over his shoulder, and walked through the door like a man who had just conquered a kingdom. This wasn't just a drop-off. This was his way of solidifying his place in Tia's empire. The eerie vibes may have haunted him, but they also drove him, pushing him deeper into the life he thought he'd left behind. Tia leaned against the counter, watching as Don flooded her kitchen island with stacks of bills. The sight was breathtaking. Bundles of cash in all denominations, covering the surface like a sea of green. She kept her expression neutral, her poker face betraying none of the excitement brewing inside her. It wasn't that Tia wasn't impressed deep down. She was overwhelmed. Don had exceeded her expectations in ways she never anticipated. She knew he wasn't a hustler by nature and didn't dabble in anything illegal, at least not until now. Yet here he was, moving like a seasoned player, making moves that even Varnell would respect. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together how Don had managed to flip so much money in just a few hours. She had deliberately paired him with Varnell to reawaken his dormant hustling instincts, to immerse him in her world and test his adaptability. But this was something different, something extraordinary. Tia studied him as he stood there, beaming with pride. He was like a dog wagging its tail, eager to do more, to prove himself. Yet, the most telling moment came when Don didn't even flinch at the thought of keeping any of the cash. He never asked for a cut or gave any indication he expected one. He simply delivered and walked away, his focus entirely on her and what she needed. This selflessness struck a chord deep within Tia. It was rare to find someone willing to play their role without seeking validation or reward. To her, Don wasn't just useful, he was a rare gem, a true asset to her growing empire. But she kept those thoughts to herself, locking them away behind a steely exterior. Control was everything to Tia, and she wouldn't let her emotions betray her. Don casually excused himself, disappearing into the back of the apartment to take a shower. The sound of water running was the only clue he was still there, as Tia picked up her phone, dialing Varnell. "Yo, guess what?" she said in a hushed tone, her voice brimming with a restrained excitement she struggled to contain. "What's good, sis?" Varnell's voice was calm on the other end. "Don just came through with a drop," she said, her voice low but alive with energy. "I'm talking stacks V, like he's been doing this his whole life." Varnell chuckled softly. "Told you the man had potential. You just had to give him a lane." Tia smiled, biting her lip to keep from squealing like a giddy schoolgirl. She didn't want to admit how impressed she was, even to Varnell, but the weight of the cash on her kitchen island was undeniable proof. "I'm keeping my eye on him," Tia said, forcing a more measured tone. "But I'll admit, he's surprising me." "Don't let him surprise you too much, T," Varnell warned. "You know how this game is. Keep him close but controlled." "Always," Tia replied, her mind already spinning with plans for Don's next move. As the water in the shower stopped, Tia hung up, her gaze returning to the mountain of cash. She had found something rare in Don, something she wasn't ready to share with anyone, not even him. Tia entered the bedroom as the first light of dawn spilled through the curtains, holding a small, neatly wrapped box with a bow perched on top. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Don stirred awake. His eyes slowly peeled open, and the sight of her holding the box brought a drowsy smile to his face. "What's this, my lady?" he asked, his voice still heavy with sleep. "This is for you, my love," she said softly, placing the box in his hands. Don sat up, blinking away the remnants of sleep as he untied the bow and peeled back the paper. Inside lay a flawless Cartier diamond-encrusted watch, shimmering under the soft morning light. The craftsmanship was impeccable, a piece fit for a king, yet its brilliance seemed to carry a weight heavier than Don expected. He stared at it for a moment, his brows knitting together. "Tia," he began, his tone uncertain, "I can't accept this." Tia's confident demeanor faltered for a split second. Her smile froze, and she tilted her head, masking her surprise. "What do you mean you can't accept it?" Don hesitated, running a hand through his hair as he tried to articulate what he was feeling. The events of the previous night, the cash drop, the adrenaline, the eerie sense of stepping back into a world he thought he'd left behind, left a lingering discomfort. The watch felt like a symbol of something he wasn't ready to embrace. He paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like I sold a piece of myself last night. I'm not sure if this is me." Tia's expression tightened, though she tried to hide it. Inside, a storm of emotions swirled: confusion, frustration, disbelief. No one had ever turned down a gift from her. No one had ever dared challenge her belief that everyone has a price. But here was Don, the man she'd slowly been weaving into her world, rejecting her offering. Her poker face slipped momentarily, revealing a flicker of vulnerability before she quickly composed herself. She forced a soft laugh, waving a dismissive hand as if it were no big deal. "It's yours, Don. Wear it when you feel like it," she said, her voice light, but with an edge she couldn't quite conceal. Tia placed the box on the nightstand and stood, smoothing her silk robe as she turned toward the door. "I'll be in the kitchen," she added, her tone neutral but her mind racing. As she walked away, her thoughts churned. No one had ever rejected her gifts, her control, her authority. Yet Don had, calmly, respectfully, but undeniably. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't shake. For the first time, Tia questioned whether Don was the gem she thought he was, or if he might be something even more dangerous to her, a man she couldn't fully own. The business thrived, and with its success came the occasional nights of reckless indulgence. Varnell often drove his legendary donk, a candy-painted masterpiece sitting on 26-inch chrome blade wheels, up to Raleigh, leaving it parked in Tia's building lot. Those nights held a rare sense of freedom for Tia and Don, a chance to escape the weight of their growing empire. Under the cover of darkness, they'd sneak out, climb into the donk, and cruise the quiet streets of the city. Sometimes they'd drop the convertible top, the night air cool against their faces as they laughed and talked about their next moves. The gleam of chrome and the low rumble of the engine turned heads, but they didn't care. These nights were theirs, carefree moments of opulence and audacity. Tia, ever the queen of appearances, dressed to kill. Her mink coat shimmered under the streetlights, paired with Louis Vuitton rain boots and skin-tight Miss 60 dungarees that hugged her toned physique. She loved to flaunt her assets, a reminder to herself and others that she was still at the top of her game. Don, on the other hand, enjoyed capturing their escapades for social media. Perched high in the donk, he'd pull out his phone, vlogging their adventures. The videos were like bait, showcasing stacks of cash, rare designer luxuries, and glimpses of Tia, the enigmatic woman beside him. Tia played her role perfectly, her image carefully curated. She knew the allure of mystery, and she knew the effect it had on people watching. Each video was a chess move, a calculated step forward. People would wonder, who was this woman? Was she Don's lover, his partner, his queen? It didn't matter. Their curiosity only fueled the brand they were building. For Don, it was fun, a way to enjoy the spoils of their labor. For Tia, it was another tool in her arsenal, another way to maintain control. But for both, those nights sitting high in Varnell's donk were a reminder of why they did what they did: the thrill, the power, and the undeniable feeling of being untouchable. Tia's growing enterprise began to merge seamlessly with Don's connections in the underground scene, particularly his DVD magazine's roster of clients. Recognizing an untapped resource, she instructed Don to subtly comb through his network, pinpointing the major marijuana hustlers. One by one, they became part of Tia's distribution chain, brokered through Don. For Don, this wasn't just business, it was a gesture of loyalty. He never took a cut from Tia, focusing instead on ensuring every transaction was precise. He operated with a meticulousness that sometimes clashed with Tia's more aggressive, results-driven approach. One evening, Don was in the middle of a drop. Sitting in Big Slim's sleek white BMW, he handed over several pounds of high-end marijuana to a local rapper they both knew. As Slim counted stacks of rubber-banded 20s, Don watched the money pile up in his lap, ensuring the amount was accurate. The sudden ring of his phone startled him. He glanced at the screen Tia. Her name flashed like an omen. Don picked up, and before he could greet her, Tia's sharp voice cut through the line. "Come on, bring the cash," she barked, her tone leaving no room for debate. "But," Don began, trying to explain he was double-checking the count. "I don't care what's there," she snapped. "Give him the marijuana, and if it's short, we'll have his ass nailed to a cross in less than 24 hours to make it right. The main thing is to get out of Dodge once you make your sting." Click. She hung up before he could respond. Don didn't hesitate. He dumped the stacks of cash into a plastic Finish Line sneaker bag, stuffed it under his arm, and exited the BMW. Slim gave him a confused glance, but Don wasn't sticking around for explanations. He slid into the passenger seat of Tia's waiting car, and they sped off from the shopping center in minutes. The air in the car was thick. Tia gripped the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road, but her energy radiating irritation. "You can't be sitting there thumbing through cash like some outdated hustler," she said, glancing at Don with a mix of disbelief and exasperation. "I was just making sure." "I don't care," she interrupted. "You make the drop, you get out. If it's short, we'll handle it. The game isn't about trust, it's about control. Let them think they're getting away with something. That's when they slip, and we tighten the noose." Don sat quietly, absorbing her words. He knew Tia's methods were cutthroat, but it was moments like this that reminded him just how sharp and unyielding she could be. Tia softened slightly, taking a deep breath as she turned onto the interstate. "You're good at this, Don," she said, her voice calmer now. "But you've got to learn to move faster. The longer you linger, the more vulnerable you are. Hustling isn't just about money, it's about survival." Don nodded, gripping the bag of cash tighter. He didn't argue, knowing she was right. This wasn't his world, not completely, but he was in it now. And Tia? She was a master at playing the game. Don wasn't new to the game. In fact, he had been one of the main architects of it during his prime, penning the unofficial 10 hustling and player commandments that rippled through the ghettos of America. Every hustler worth their salt knew them, and many lived by them, including Don himself. Yet, in this new chapter of his life, working alongside Tia, he chose to play it smart. Or, as he often thought, smart enough to seem dumb. Tia moved fast, and her operations were ruthless. She wasn't the type to second-guess or hesitate. Don admired that about her, but he also understood the inherent dangers. This wasn't the same game he had once dominated. The stakes were higher, the players more cutthroat, and the consequences more devastating. Don's role with Tia often felt like walking a tightrope. On one hand, he was her confidant, her right-hand man in a world where trust was rare. On the other, he was constantly protecting himself, watching for the faintest hints of danger that could drag him into a federal indictment, or worse, a sweeping RICO charge. It was a delicate balance. He helped Tia grow her empire, guiding her with his experience while ensuring he left no fingerprints on the operations. He played along with her fiery commands and acted like a novice under her sharp critiques, all the while knowing he could run circles around most of the hustlers she dealt with. But survival was the name of the game now, and Don had learned long ago that survival often meant playing the part. To Tia, he was loyal, dependable, even a bit naive. To himself, he was a double agent, a man navigating the blurred lines between helping Tia expand her reach and keeping his own hands clean enough to avoid a courtroom. Late at night, when he was alone, Don would replay the day's events in his mind, analyzing every move and every conversation. He thought about how far he had come and how much further he was willing to go. His past whispered warnings, but his present kept pushing him forward. One thing was certain: Don wasn't just in Tia's world. He was embedded in it, a player in her game and his own. And as much as he enjoyed their partnership, he knew better than anyone that this life came with an expiration date. The only question was who would call time first, Tia, the feds, or the streets. Varnell lived a life of luxury that belied his youth. He never touched a steering wheel, instead lounging in the back seat of whatever luxury ride was at his disposal. He was a spectacle of wealth and audacity, pockets brimming with cash, wrists and neck adorned with enough diamonds to outshine any light show. His frame was lean, his boyish face deceivingly innocent, but beneath that facade was a hustler sharp to his core, a man molded in part by his older sister, Tia. To her, Varnell was still her baby brother, but she had trained him to be a kingpin. Tia maintained strict control over the women who hovered around Varnell. Any young lady hoping to gain access to him might enjoy a fleeting night in the glow of their world, but that was the extent of it. Tia made sure none of them got too comfortable. To her, Varnell's focus was non-negotiable, and distractions were costly. On this particular day, Varnell made an exception and took the wheel of his prized possession, the big convertible donk with 26-inch chrome blade wheels. The engine roared as they sped down the highway toward Raleigh, the winter sun gleaming off the polished paint. Don sat shotgun, enjoying the crisp breeze slicing through the convertible's open top. At times, Don felt like a babysitter, guiding this young hustler through a world he already knew too well. But in moments like this, cruising down the highway, he also felt like a student. Varnell was young, bold, and ambitious, but he wasn't reckless. Don began to understand that, despite the boyish charm and diamond-encrusted persona, Varnell had his own style of hustling, a style Don was learning to respect. For Don, the marijuana game had always felt like small-time work. In his past life, he had moved in circles where the stakes were much higher, the money faster, and the risks far deadlier. But being around Tia and Varnell had shifted his perspective. Tia's operation wasn't just about moving pounds, it was about dominance, influence, and legacy. Varnell embodied that vision, blending the audacity of youth with the discipline instilled by his sister. As the donk glided down the interstate, Varnell turned the music up and grinned. "You good, big homie?" he asked Don, his baby face breaking into a sly smile. Don smirked and nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. Just watching you do your thing, young king." Varnell laughed, the sound full of confidence. "Keep watching. You might learn something." And Don did, because for all his years in the game, this new generation had its own rules, its own rhythm. And in Varnell, he saw the future of hustling slick, bold, and unapologetically ruthless. Varnell eased his donk off the highway onto Glenwood Avenue, the chrome blades on his 26-inch rims gleaming like a beacon in the winter sun. The rumble of the engine echoed as he turned into the lot of upper-level customs, a spot renowned in the South for turning old-school classics into rolling showcases of wealth and power. This was Varnell's kingdom, a place where the size of your wallet dictated the level of respect you commanded. The donk was more than just a car, it was a symbol of his status. In the South, owning an old-school classic wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about making a statement. A true hustler didn't just drive a car, they invested in it, molded it into a masterpiece, and poured stacks of cash into every detail. For Varnell, His donk was a walking receipt of his dominance. With over 200 grand already sunk into the project, it was a testament to how deep his pockets ran. As he pulled into the shop, the crew at upper-level customs stopped what they were doing to admire the arrival of the donk. Heads turned as the car came to a slow halt, its pristine paint job glinting under the shop lights. Varnell stepped out, dressed in his usual drip, designer jeans, crisp white sneakers, and a hoodie that probably cost more than a month's rent for most. The diamonds around his neck caught every stray light, throwing sparkles onto the pavement. Varnell, one of the shop techs, called out, walking over with a clipboard in hand. "We just finished the box for the subs, custom fiberglass, wrapped in black suede. You're going to feel this system in your chest when it's done." Varnell nodded, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Good. I didn't drop a bag on this for it to just sound decent. I want this thing shaking the pavement." The tech laughed. "Trust me, it will. You've got the best setup we've ever done. We're talking stadium-level sound. Ain't nobody out here competing with this." Varnell pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and peeled off a few bills without counting, handing them to the tech. "That's for y'all to keep pushing. I need this ready by Friday. No excuses." The tech nodded eagerly, pocketing the cash. "It'll be ready. I'll make sure of it." As Varnell strolled around the shop, inspecting the progress on his prized ride, Don leaned against the passenger door, taking it all in. Don had seen wealth before, but Varnell's approach was different. It wasn't loud for the sake of being loud. It was calculated, deliberate. Every dollar spent on the donk was a flex, a message to anyone watching. "This isn't hustle money, this is legacy money. You putting this much into a car," Don said, shaking his head with a smirk. "You could have just bought a Lambo." Varnell laughed, looking over his shoulder. "A Lambo don't turn heads like this down here. This is how you show you're real. Anybody can finance a supercar. Not everybody can drop 200 grand cash into a classic." Don couldn't argue with that. In the South, the rules of the game were different, and Varnell was playing to win. At just 21, Varnell was the embodiment of youthful power and untouchable swagger. His donk, dripping in chrome and customized to perfection, was more than just a car. It was a plaything for a young kingpin who had everything at his fingertips. His jewelry collection alone, worth a couple of million, was a testament to his wealth and status. Each piece a shimmering declaration of his dominance. And behind the bling and the toys was an unstoppable machine, an ever-growing marijuana empire that funneled endless streams of cash into his pockets and extended his reach far beyond Rose Hill. Untouchable wasn't just a word, it was Varnell's reality. The streets whispered his name with a mix of awe and fear. His network of young, reckless soldiers moved like shadows, loyal to the bone and ready to unleash chaos at his command. Each one was a reflection of Varnell's own sharp, calculated ruthlessness. They were his armor, his eyes, and his fists when necessary, ensuring that no threat went unchecked and no rival went unchallenged. Despite his youth, Varnell carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned boss. His every move was calculated, his every command carried weight. His operations ran like a well-oiled machine, with product moving across county lines like clockwork. And while many underestimated him because of his age, those who dared to cross him learned quickly that this kid was no ordinary hustler. His network of connections stretched deep: dealers, suppliers, even the occasional cop on the take. It was an intricate web that Varnell had carefully built under Tia's guidance, but now it was his to control. His power wasn't just in the money or the product, it was in his ability to inspire loyalty, fear, and admiration all at once. In a world where most young men his age were still figuring out their path, Varnell had already paved his with diamonds, horsepower, and cash. To call him untouchable was almost an insult. He was something greater. He was a young king in a realm of his own making, a prodigy of the hustle, and the streets were his kingdom. Varnell's operation was a seamless machine, powered by the relentless hustle of his young gangbangers. They moved product with precision, delivering marijuana by the pound to Raleigh in a steady stream. Each trip was calculated, with routes mapped out to avoid suspicion, and young soldiers who were fearless, fast, and loyal to their leader. It was a constant flow, one that never wavered, no matter the season or the risk. Tia was the anchor, the mastermind who made sure every pound moved effortlessly. Her reputation preceded her, ensuring buyers came to her with no hesitation and no questions asked. She operated with a cool confidence that made her untouchable, collecting cash with one hand and sealing deals with the other. Whether it was negotiating a higher price or ensuring a late-night drop-off went smoothly, Tia made it all look easy. The sibling synergy was unmatched. Varnell supplied the product and the manpower, while Tia wielded the finesse to move it and collect the profits. Every dollar was accounted for, every transaction airtight. They secured their funds meticulously, stashing them in secret locations scattered across Rose Hill and Raleigh. Whether it was hidden in the walls of Tia's upscale apartment or buried in the countryside, the cash was always protected, waiting to be reinvested into their ever-growing empire. As the wheels of their operation churned, the streets buzzed with whispers of their success. Tia and Varnell were a force, unstoppable, untouchable, and always a step ahead. Together, they turned what some would see as a simple hustle into a lucrative, high-stakes business that showed no signs of slowing down. The money poured in, and with it, so did their power and influence, solidifying their place at the top of the game. Don hadn't spoken to Big Gary in months, but when he finally did, it wasn't for a casual catch-up. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he delivered his warning. "Gary, be on high alert," Don said, his tone sharp yet controlled. "Things are about to take a turn, and it's between me and Tia. I don't know how or when, but I feel it coming." Big Gary, loyal as ever but cautious, pressed for more information. "What's the nature of it, Don? How bad are we talking here?" Don paused for a moment, the weight of his thoughts hanging in the silence. "I don't know specifics. It's just a hunch," he finally admitted. "But it's strong, real strong, and I need to start making my way out of her circle. Quietly. I can't afford to raise any suspicions." Gary's silence on the other end spoke volumes. He knew Don well enough to trust his gut instincts, especially when it came to survival. "All right," Gary said after a beat. "You know I got your back, but you better be careful. Tia ain't the type to let anyone walk away easily." Don let out a low sigh. "I know. That's the tricky part. She sees everything, hears everything. I can't let her feel like I'm slipping away, or she'll close in on me before I get the chance to move." Big Gary thought for a moment, then offered, "You need a safe spot. You know where to find me. Just keep me posted, and don't do anything stupid. You're walking a thin line here." Don nodded, even though Gary couldn't see him. "Appreciate it, Gary. I'll keep you in the loop. For now, just stay ready." As he hung up, Don's mind raced. He had navigated dangerous waters before, but this was different. Tia was sharp, calculating, and relentless when it came to control. Getting out of her circle without tipping her off was going to require every ounce of his street smarts and a level of finesse he hadn't needed in years. And as much as he hated to admit it, he wasn't entirely sure if he could pull it off without leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. Varnell's nights out were never ordinary. They were meticulously planned displays of power and protection. His young and dangerous entourage moved like a well-trained unit, their eyes always scanning for threats as they surrounded him in the VIP sections of clubs or at the wild scenes of Black Bike Beach nights. Tia, ever the master strategist, orchestrated these outings from behind the scenes. She was constantly on the phone, choreographing his safety in real time, from who should flank his sides to how the cars should be parked for a quick getaway. Dawn often overheard these conversations, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the air with precision. "No mistakes, no gaps," she'd bark into the phone. "I want eyes on him at all times. If you see anything off, you call me immediately." Many nights were like this, a tense ballet of coordination that ensured Varnell could enjoy himself without fear of a surprise ambush or rival confrontation. But for Don, it was becoming too much. He'd come too far in life, clawed his way out of public chaos, to now find himself in the thick of it again. He understood it, of course. Tia's need to protect her little brother, the fortress of safety they had built. But he wanted no part of it anymore. The echoes of his past crept closer with every outing, every whispered conversation he overheard. He knew too well what this level of vigilance meant. It wasn't just about safety, it was about survival, in a world where the stakes were life and death. And Don had spent years escaping that life, only to feel himself slowly being pulled back in. One night, as Varnell's entourage prepped for another outing, Don sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. He could hear Tia in the next room, giving precise instructions for the night's operation. "They'll be at the back entrance. Make sure the cars stay running," she said, "and tell Varnell no after parties. He's in and out." Don sighed heavily. He admired her dedication, her sharp mind, but it wasn't his world anymore. Every instinct in him screamed to leave, to cut ties before his past caught up with him. He could feel it, like a shadow looming over his shoulder. Tia's world was tightening around him, and if he didn't make his move soon, he feared he'd lose himself in it completely. The soft golden glow of the morning sun crept into the apartment as Don shuffled into the kitchen for a glass of orange juice. The air was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and a serene quiet filled the space. But there, sprawled across Tia's luxury velvet couch like a cherubic figure from a Renaissance painting, lay Varnell. His youthful face was peaceful, lips slightly parted as he slept a sleep so deep it seemed as though no earthly force could wake him. Stacks of money peeked out from the pockets of his designer jeans, carelessly stuffed like afterthoughts. Around his neck and wrists, diamond necklaces and bracelets glimmered faintly in the morning light, their brilliance dulled only by the way they disappeared into the folds of his clothing and skin. One Prada loafer rested precariously on the edge of the couch, its partner still snug and laced on his other foot, completing the image of a young hustler who had burned through the night in pure, unrelenting indulgence. Don paused, glass in hand, and took in the scene. Varnell, for all his sharp edges and dangerous allure, looked almost childlike in this moment, vulnerable in a way few ever got to see. With a quiet sigh, Don set the glass down, walked over to the couch, and gently pulled the soft cashmere throw from the back of it. He draped it over Varnell, tucking it around his body with the same care one might show a younger sibling. "Sleep it off, kid," Don muttered softly, shaking his head with a faint smile. He stood there for a moment longer, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Varnell's chest, before turning back toward the bedroom. The warmth of Tia's presence awaited him, and as he slipped back under the covers, he felt a strange mix of emotions. In that quiet moment, he realized that for all the chaos surrounding them, this was still a family. Flawed, unpredictable, and dangerous, but a family nonetheless. And for now, he was part of it.